I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Gadigal people in Sydney. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. The Coalition's costings show budget deficits that would be at least $10 billion less than Labor's forecast over 4 years, but $8 billion worse off in the first 2 years. The Opposition's costings also show an $800 million cut to foreign aid and $17.2 billion in cuts to the public service. Do the numbers add up? I'll speak to the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor live in just a moment. Ukraine and the US have signed a deal over critical minerals, which is set to fund a jointly managed reconstruction fund for the war-torn nation. Under the agreement, the US would benefit from Ukraine's critical mineral deposits without provisions regarding any Ukrainian debt obligations to America. Is the conflict in Ukraine a step closer to ending? I'll speak to the Ukrainian ambassador this hour. And two national polls today show Labor extending its lead over the Coalition. YouGov's poll projects Labor will win an outright majority, while both it and Redbridge show Labor leading the Coalition 53 to 47% in two-party preferred terms. But how well have polls been conducted this election? I'll ask my panel of pollsters and election analysts a little later. We'll get to the Shadow Treasurer in just a moment, but let's begin today with some confusion from the Opposition on what their policy is over changing the national school curriculum. Now, earlier in the campaign, the Opposition leader Peter Dutton suggested the Coalition would withhold funding from schools pushing political agendas. But today he was pressed on this. He said there was no proposal to do so.
What we'll do is we'll work with parents to reflect what they want to see in the education system, and that is a good education for their children and a coalition government. When we were last in government, despite what the Prime Minister has told you, the funding went from $13 billion to $25 billion a year, which is significant. So we'll continue to fund education at a record rate, and we want our kids to get the best possible education.
But on curriculum, what would you change?
Yes, no.
What would you change about the curriculum? Just going back to that question.
We don't have any proposals.
Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price stood up in Alice Springs this afternoon and was asked whether she was concerned that Peter Dutton appeared not to be committed to these curriculum changes. She told reporters there was a proposal through Shadow Cabinet.
Well, with the conversations that I have had with our Shadow Cabinet Minister, Sarah Henderson, there is a plan to ensure that schools are no longer ideologically indoctrinating children, that they're actually teaching education. I know that Peter Dutton is absolutely and utterly all about ensuring that our children in this country receive an education and aren't indoctrinated.
The Prime Minister stood up at a school in Perth today and he didn't miss the opportunity to go whack over what he claimed was a change in policy.
I noticed today we've seen another backflip from Peter Dutton over school curriculum. Now, I make this point. The current school curriculum was put in place by the former government, not us. But they've looked for culture wars in every corner that they can find one. Every dark corner is where they're looking. And here, having said that they were going to rail against the curriculum, that it wasn't appropriate, now they're saying they won't touch the curriculum. So it's not clear.
It's the Prime Minister speaking earlier. Well, let's go straight now to the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor to break down the Coalition's costings that were announced this afternoon. Angus Taylor, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, PK.
There's no clear surplus in the costings that you've delivered. You'll also have even bigger deficits than Labor initially. Have you put up the white flag on delivering a surplus?
Absolutely not, PK. There's a $14 billion improvement in the budget position over the course of the 4 years, the forwards as they're called, a $40 billion reduction in debt. And what we're seeking to do here is balance household budgets that have been absolutely smashed under a bad Labor government, where we've seen homegrown inflation, the biggest reduction in our standard of living in history, more than any other peer country, balancing the need to fix household budgets and support households through a tough time, with fixing the government budget, which has been red ink deficits as far as the eye can see. We've taken the assumptions of a sluggish growth economy with limited productivity that we've had under Labor. We think we can do better than that, by the way, and we've already set a goal of getting productivity back to where it was historically, getting growth moving. And we know, though even on very conservative assumptions, a $14 billion improvement and a reduction of debt of $40 billion. And all of that is consistent with making sure we're getting spending to where we need to on defending the nation, a significant increase in defence spending, as we've already announced, and making sure that we've got those critical initiatives like helping young Australians into a house, investing in housing supply, and making sure that essential services like health and aged care get the spending they need as well. Let
me get in here. Your deficits would be, as you say in your own costings, they would be a total of $8 billion worse off in the first 2 years. You're right, then you show an improvement. But in those first 2 years, would, you know, S&P look at that and reconsider our AAA credit rating?
Well, not if you're improving the budget position over time, and that's what we're doing. I mean, I've said for a long time, and I've said it to you...
Budget will take a hit, though, the first 2 years.
Well, no, but we are dramatically improving the budget position over time. We're halving the deficit over the course of the forwards, and this is the crucial point. You've got to be on an improvement trajectory. Labor has actually taken us off a cliff. They've taken us off a cliff, and we see deficits as far as the eye can see, $180 billion of deficits under Labor. Now, we've got to be realistic about household budgets here too, and we are providing 25 cents a litre off fuel costs, $1,200 tax offset next financial year for up to $1,200 for 85% of taxpayers. I mean, these are important initiatives to fix two budgets. This is the fundamental point, PK. Two budgets have gone badly into the red under Labor, household budgets and government budget. We're doing both, and we're making a major contribution to both over this time frame.
Let me just quiz you on that, because you say you're going to halve the deficits over the forward estimates. Where's the evidence of that?
Well, it's in the numbers we put out, the costings we put out today. So, PK, there's a significant improvement in the budget position in those numbers, and the net impact is a $14 billion improvement.
That's not a halving.
If you look at the numbers, I've got them right here, if you like. I'll take you through them. So they go down over the course of the 4 years by half of where they were. And this is the improvement profile we need. Now, on top of that, there's something else here that I think is incredibly important. If we can get the economy growing faster than it has been, we can do better than that. We've already said that we'll get productivity back to historical levels. That's our goal. And we know if we can do that, having seen productivity collapse by 5.7% under Labor, we'll see an improvement, not just in household budgets, but also in the government budget, over and above the improvement we've already laid out, the $14 billion improvement.
If you were to become Treasurer on that Saturday night when hopefully we find out who wins, you wouldn't deliver a surplus as Treasurer, would you, in the first term?
Well, our goal is to continually improve, and I've made this point throughout the last 3 years. You've got to get your economy growing faster than you're spending, and then you get the budget back to balance. And we'll get it back to balance as fast as...
Level with Australians, you wouldn't deliver a surplus, though, would you?
Well, can I make this point? We'll get back to balance as fast as we possibly can after Labor has wrecked the budget. Let's be clear, they've wrecked the budget. There's no question about that. They've taken it off a cliff. $180 billion of deficits over their 4 years of their forward estimates. And our job is to fix that alongside fixing household budgets. It's in a disastrous situation as a starting point, and we're getting a significant improvement, including a $40 billion reduction in debt. PK.
OK. There's a few things that are newish. Let me ask this. This vaping potential tax, you've said you're against taxes, but are you slapping a new vaping tax on Australians?
Well, there's already a big vaping tax being imposed on Australians by criminal organisations, criminal gangs. We know the illegal trade in vapes under Labor's policy is widespread, and we know that criminal gangs are imposing their own taxes on it. We would rather have a properly regulated sector with a sensible tax on it from the government,
so it is
which benefits taxpayers, which benefits... Well, there is a tax already. I mean, when
Can you explain how your vaping tax would work? Because it is new. I mean, I didn't know about it. How would a vaping tax work under the coalition?
Actually, this policy is not new, PK. It's really important. We announced this policy of having a regulated a vape sector some time back. And we did it because right now what you're seeing is illicit sales of vapes being driven by criminal organisations and criminal gangs. And it is a big part of the criminal activity we're seeing in places like Victoria right now, but right across the country, Queensland, right across the country. We have to rid ourselves of this. And one important step forward in doing that is to have a regulated vape sector where there is a price signal. This is not something we want young people adopting naturally. We want to make sure that people think very hard before they do it. Well, hear me out. And we will, in addition to having a regulated sector with an excise on it, have $350 million set aside to go after these criminal gangs and wipe the criminal activity that's going on in this sector right out of the sector altogether. That's the goal. And I think that's a sensible pathway forward in a sector which, as I say, has been fuelling crime, has been fuelled by criminal organisations, and where there is a tax right now being imposed on everyone who buys vapes by these criminal organisations.
OK, so can you tell me what that tax will be?
$1 a millilitre.
OK, and that's quite a different arrangement. Will it normalise vaping rather than trying to crack down on vaping?
Can I say none of this is new, PK? But
it's very interesting.
We announced this policy of a regulated approach to vaping some time back, but the whole point about it is to make sure that not only are we fighting crime, more generally across our country, which we have to do, and we've announced a number of policies in that area. We're fighting the criminal organisations and the criminal gangs that are involved in this market, and we know there are deep, deep links, and we need to weed them out, and this is what this is all about, alongside making sure there's a price signal to young Australians in particular who want to take up vaping. Look, this is not something that we should encourage people to do. It really isn't.
A couple of other things that were surprises, or we didn't know until today. One of them is $800 million of aid cuts. The world is in a pretty difficult position at the moment. There's been cuts from the US in aid. I know that you're exempting a couple of areas, but is this really the right approach to be taking?
Well, first of all, it's an indexation. It's actually freezing the indexation. That's what all we're doing here. The other
but it
point
won't grow. That's what indexation is for those who are like, what are you talking about, guys? It won't grow at the same level as it would under Labor. So it's an effective cut.
Well, Labor will always say that. That's their talking points.
No, it's not.
But it's not a cut in the number. The amount you're spending is a cut in the indexation. The second point, though, which is really important, is this. The area where we think the focus needs to be is the Pacific, and we're protecting that this principle will not apply to that spending because we are in a very unstable environment, and that's why we have in these numbers an additional $12.7 billion spend on defending ourselves, defending our country, in what the Prime Minister has described as the most uncertain time since the Second World War. Now, he's described it that way, but he's not put any funding behind that description. We need to get serious about making sure we have the appropriate level of spending and defence in this country, and that's included in those numbers. And despite that significant investment we're making in defence of our nation, we are still getting, as I said, to a $14 billion improvement in the budget bottom line.
Voluntary redundancies are apparently now not part of your plan to cut 41,000 public servants, but your campaign spokesman, James Patterson, said they were just weeks ago. Why has the policy changed again?
Well, it hasn't. We've always said the focus is on natural attrition, and hiring freezes. And we're confident, as Jane Hume laid out in the press conference just a short time ago, we're very confident that that natural attrition can get us to the outcomes we've described here. We've worked closely with the Parliamentary Budget Office
so was James wrong
on that. Well, the focus is on natural attrition and hiring freezes. That's where the focus is. The focus is also on Canberra-based roles, of course, and it's not focused on frontline roles. We've been clear about these principles all the way along. There's no ambiguity on that. There never has been. And that I think, is consistent with the principle that we want better government, not bigger government. Labor always thinks that the way to better government is bigger government. I've learnt through the course of my career that's not the case. Yeah, you want to have better government. You want to have better teams.
We have to go to the big one. I know our viewers will be thinking, how about nuclear? Because that's been such a key part of your offer, but also Labor's attack on your offer.
Well, they're lies. They're lies,
Okay, well, let me go to the question.
We
haven't even mentioned what it is. Let's go to the question.
Yeah.
It's $400 million at first and then another $36 billion in the medium term. That's a massively smaller number than you would think building an entire nuclear infrastructure would cost. Have you underpriced this?
No, they're the numbers. They're consistent with everything we've been saying all the way along. You see, here's the point, PK. Labor has been lying. They've been lying. They've been caught lying. And the truth is that the numbers are nothing like what they like to say. And they should be called out for this. It's completely unacceptable that a major political party that is currently in government is lying about now. So this can I just finish? This is incredibly important. These are numbers that are very manageable within this budget. $400 million over the course of the forwards. Of course, that's the time frame over which we're getting $14 billion improvement in the budget bottom line. These are very manageable, very sensible, very reasonable, and they get us to, over time, to 14 gigawatts of zero emission base load power, which is, if we want to get emissions down in this country, that can make a huge difference. Labor likes to lie. They're doing it on polling booths. So they're doing it wherever they go. They should be called out, and I'm calling them out now.
Okay, so $36 billion over 4 years, then what happens?
No, over the $36 billion is the investment over the medium term. That's through to 2035.
Okay, and then how much more will you...
So the total then, which we've outlined, through to 2050... By the way, Labor never budgets through to 2050. I mean, this is extraordinary doubles.
Sure, but I can only really cross-examine you right now. So
yeah, no,
nuclear is obviously going to cost a lot. There are cost blowouts everywhere it's happened. So people have the right to kind of wonder if this will be the final price tag.
They're the Labor talking points. It's just nonsense. If you go to Korea, they've been able to build these things at good price and very much in line with what we're talking about. And other countries around the world. There's over 40 being built right now. I mean, this is complete nonsense from Labor. They got their mates who make donations to them, who are being called out, by the way, on what they're doing, to come up with these fictitious numbers, and then they're running them around polling booths around the country. This is bad for our democracy. PK.
Okay.
It's unacceptable, it's wrong, and the numbers we've laid out today show you just how wrong they are, and you made that point yourself.
All right, just finally, if the coalition doesn't go as well as you'd obviously hope, are you going to run for the Liberal leadership?
I tell you what I'm running for, PK, I'm running for Treasurer.
Yeah, but after that.
No,
but after that.
Look, let me tell you, the nature of election campaigns is you're focused on one thing and one thing only, in my book anyway, and that's winning. And winning for me means becoming Treasurer of this great country.
And if you're not lucky enough to become Treasurer, will you consider going for the leadership?
Well, I'm focused on this job. It would be the greatest privilege of my life. I think Australia can do better. Okay. I think we can't afford another 3 years
I'll ask
like
one
the last
more
3
cheeky
years.
Question.
And I want to be Treasurer of this country.
Can you rule out running for the leadership?
I'm not doing scenarios. I'm doing one scenario. Singular, not plural. That is us winning and me becoming Treasurer. That's been my goal for a long while. PK, you and I have had many discussions about it over the last couple of years, and that's because I think we can do better. Our economy can do better. It's gone backwards badly over the last 3 years. Household budgets have have been in free fall. I want to make sure that prosperity, aspiration, owning a home, starting a business, building a business are all realistic hopes and aspirations for many Australians, and that's my goal.
Angus Taylor, you've been generous with your time. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, PK.
To get an immediate response to all of this, let's bring in the Finance Minister, Katy Gallagher. Katy Gallagher, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, PK.
The Coalition has outlined its costings this afternoon. Same timeline that you did it when you were in opposition. Of course, the way politics works is that you're already questioning elements here, but have they fessed up and explained? I mean, there's a nuclear figure in there. Can you see that they've kind of outlined what their approach will be transparently?
Well, I think there's a lot of problems with their costings, and it's no surprise that they did do it on Thursday afternoon. And there is a difference there, PK. When we were releasing ours from opposition, we were releasing our policies with costings attached or included in that. And so we were being much more upfront than they've been prepared to be. But I think today has confirmed what we all knew, which is we'll see higher taxes under the Liberals, savage cuts, and there's a lot of holes in their document that they've released this afternoon, including on nuclear, but also in the areas of APS, and significant cuts to housing, skills and energy. And I think that's a real contrast between the responsible costings that Jim and I, the Treasurer and I, put out on Monday.
So you've questioned their nuclear figures, but there was quite a significant takedown of the critique that Labor's provided, the exaggerated figure of how much it would cost. Angus Taylor says it's $36 billion in the medium term. Why don't you accept that number?
Well, I think we have to go on what we've seen through the campaign. David Littleproud said from day one they would start building these nuclear reactors.
Well, everyone knows you can't do that.
Wanted to talk.
You can't do that. You need to change laws.
Well, that is the commitment they made. That is their commitment, and they've been upfront about that. So they said that. They haven't visited the sites. They don't want to talk about it. And I heard Angus Taylor there questioning the cost of nuclear. Just look at what is happening around the world. In Hinkley, a $35 billion nuclear reactor is over a decade late and costs $90 billion. And that's in a country where there is an existing nuclear industry, of which we don't have here. So I think it's just laughable to suggest that you don't need much more investment over the short term if you're actually going to genuinely build these nuclear reactors. So they are either not committed to it, or they're hiding the numbers from people because they're going to make savage cuts, including to Medicare, in order to pay for it.
Well, their point is that you don't. The point that Angus Taylor just made there is you don't show us your forecast over 10 years of how you're going to pay for things either. Isn't that a reasonable argument? I mean, they've given us the forecast in the medium term.
Well, we're not suggesting that taxpayers fund a whole new energy system, which is what they are suggesting. We have accounted for our investments in energy, of which they want to cut through their costings today. And we've been very clear about that, including with the role that the private sector will play in investing in that renewable energy future. Now, this mob are wanting to build an entire new industry and bankroll it themselves because no one else will touch it. And they want us to believe that they're not going to have to cut other things to pay for it. And, you know, no surprise they're handing out these costings in the afternoon of a day and a half before the election and after 5 million people have voted.
Well, they've also made it clear that their budget bottom line will be better than yours, that the first 2 years it won't be better, but then they turn it around. You know, that is the proposition they're offering. I think it was a slight exaggeration, but essentially, looking at the figures, Angus Taylor says they'll halve that deficit. Isn't that a better offer given the S&P warning from, you know, that was actually just delivered this week about, you know, what it means for us potentially in our AAA credit rating, and that being potentially at risk?
Well, for the group that have been complaining about government spending and inflation for the last 3 years, they are now spending more in the short term than what our costings do. So bigger deficits, savage cuts, That is clear. And increased income taxes and other charges, quite a lot of charges that they're imposing through their costings today that they didn't draw attention to or want to talk about. But so high taxes, bigger deficits and savage cuts, that's the costing document when I looked at it. And then, even if you just accept those 3 points, then you've got all these significant problems with other elements like the APS numbers, the cuts to the APS, which they've accounted for, about $17 billion in cuts. But based on a whole lot of dodgy numbers that they can't deliver upon. So I don't accept for a moment that their bottom line will be any better than, in fact, it'll be much worse than the one that Jim and I handed down on Monday, which was careful, thoughtful and very transparent about what we want to do over the next 4 years.
Productivity growth in our country has clearly been a big issue. They want to get productivity growth of 1.5%. Isn't that a worthy objective given the dire state our productivity has been in?
Well, if they were so concerned about productivity, why are they cutting skills? Why are they making students pay more for their HECS debt? Why are they turning their back on the renewable energy transition? I mean, these are 3 key areas where we need to invest in our people, invest in skills, invest in clean energy, invest in data and digital to drive the productivity agenda in the modern world. You know, every country, when you look at it, has had, issues with productivity as we undergo this economic transformation. But if they were so concerned about it, why all the cuts? And why get rid of fee-free TAFE? Why refuse to invest in education? I mean, it just doesn't make sense and it doesn't add up. They say they want to be pro-productivity, but then they outline absolutely no way of getting there. Like, it's just been an exercise in smoke and mirrors, and the Australian people aren't mugs, you know. They aren't mugs, and they're being treated like mugs by Angus Taylor and Jane Hume today.
There's a lot of polling about. Of course, the only poll that matters, I'm going to say it for you so that you don't have to waste your time, is the one on Saturday. But I want to get that over and done with. But I just want to get a sense. I got it. I want to get a sense from you about some of this polling, including the YouGov polling suggesting you're about to win a majority. Is that what you think? Is that how it feels on the ground to you?
PK, I think there's 156 local campaigns operating around the country. I think in a number of those areas there are very, very tight, contests. And I don't think anyone will know until all of the votes are counted and we get some of those indications between 6 and 10 on Saturday night when we see what's happening. I think we've run a good campaign. I think the Prime Minister has showed the leadership he needs to. Our policies are positive and going right to the issues that matter to Australians like Medicare and education and renewable energy, all of those. And I think they reflect issues that people have been talking about with me on the booth when I've been travelling around. And I think it's a contrast between what the opposition are offering, which, shown in their costings today, bigger deficits, savage cuts and higher taxes. And, I think I'll know when you know, PK. I mean, seriously, it's very, very tight in lots of seats and, the Australian people will decide on Saturday. We take nothing for granted and you'll see all of us campaigning right up until 6 p.m. Saturday. So
is there a danger then? Because there's so much psychology to all of this, and is there a danger for you? Are you feeling nervous that people might be feeling a little complacent both on your side and also perhaps in the electorate thinking, oh, well, Labor's going to win, maybe they'll feel more comfortable putting a protest vote?
Well, I'm always nervous and anxious. I think that's me naturally anyway, but it's exacerbated during campaign. Yeah, it's good in a lot of ways. It means we're always on, but in campaigns that gets elevated and escalated. I don't think there's any complacency at all on the Labor side. We know how hard it is for Labor governments to win federally. We're all very passionate about the work we've done over the last 3 years together with the Australian people, and we're all really hopeful that we can secure enough support to continue that work. But, the Australian people will decide. Our job is to run a campaign that explains to people what we want to do, how we want to build a better future for Australia, and also draw the contrast between our Prime Minister and Peter Dutton and the threat that he poses, the risk he poses to Australia. And I think, at the end of the day, people of Australia will decide, but I think our campaign has been very much focused on building Australia's future.
Thank you so much for joining us, Katy Gallagher. I think that's probably our last conversation till the other side, so I'll talk to you on the other side, whatever your role might be.
Okay. Thanks, Pico.
Let's go to a pretty significant international story today. Ukraine and the US have signed a deal over critical mineral resources, which is set to fund a jointly managed reconstruction fund for the war-torn nation. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said it was a sign of the Trump administration's commitment to a peace process.
Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term. It's time for this cruel and senseless war to end.
The Ukrainian ambassador, Vasyl Myroshnychenko, joins me now to discuss the historic deal from the Gold Coast. Welcome to the program, Ambassador.
Hi, Patricia.
Is the war one step closer to ending?
It's definitely a milestone in the US-Ukraine relations. As you know, they've been quite rocky since President Trump has assumed the office. And it's really an achievement, and we're very proud that we were able to negotiate it and finally sign an agreement, which is crucial for Ukraine's recovery, rebuild, and actually for American commitment to Ukraine long term.
Do you think the deal is fair to Ukraine? Give me a sense of, obviously we found out earlier this morning Australian time, but just give me a sense of some of the components of it. It seemed to be on the table, then it was off the table. Now clearly that deal has been brokered. Is it a fair deal?
It is a fair deal because if you actually look at the terms of the agreement which we have signed, we created a fund where it's 50-50 being run and owned by the US and Ukrainian government. We put their money, which we generate from new investments, which will go into the development of natural resources, including oil, gas, critical minerals, rare earth minerals. And then Americans put in there the money, or they put their equipment or material, which they're providing to Ukraine. And for the next 10 years, the money from that fund will only be used for Ukraine's rebuild and reconstructions, which means for further investment. And only after 10 years pass, we will be then redistributing the profits from that fund to both governments when the time is right. So I think it's a fair deal. It's something that the Ukrainian government has actually offered U.S. President Trump from the very beginning. I mean, he got that offer when he was still not in office, when he was still campaigning. And I'm very pleased, and everybody's very pleased that deal was signed. And also we have to look, actually, Patricia, what other opportunities are. And I think there are many opportunities opening up for Australian businesses. And I'm happy to tell you more of how Australian businesses can benefit from this deal.
Well, you've opened the door, so it would be remiss of me not to ask. I mean, we have our own critical minerals industry. We've announced, at least on one side of politics in this campaign, for a reserve, a critical minerals reserve. As you know, the election's on Saturday, so we don't know if that'll happen, if Labor will win. But how might that work?
Oh, actually, I've recently been traveling to Western Australia quite often, and I had many meetings with your actual rare earth minerals companies, but also with engineering companies. And as you know, Perth is one of the global capitals, or the global capital for the mining industry in the world, with your expertise, with your technology, with capital, which is available there for the mining sector. And I think we will benefit, both Americans and Ukrainians will benefit from your experience, from your engineering companies. And I had meetings with many of those, right? So engineering is part of it, you know, when you build infrastructure to actually extract the minerals. Second part is processing. And this is where we can also cooperate with you. As you know, processing is actually a bottleneck for critical minerals and the rare earth minerals, because it's all about what technology you use. It's very capital intensive. It's quite, engineering intensive. So we will need that help
to build that processing within Ukraine, and also then building global supply chains, making sure that we can diversify the supply of critical minerals, rare earth minerals from China. Because for now, everybody depends on China, and China can limit the export of their rare earth minerals. And as you know, rare earth minerals are used in renewable industry, rare earths is used in defense industry, and actually in many other critical industries which are very important for national security and defense of Australia, of America, and many European partners. So it's important that we can contribute as Ukraine, as a country, towards better security for many countries. And I think this is our contribution to that process, and this is where I see collaboration between Ukrainian companies, Australian companies, American companies for the benefit of the global democracies.
So obviously military aid is at the heart of what Ukraine has needed to continue the defence of your country. Does this deal over critical minerals give you a sense of guarantee that the US will still come to the party to keep providing that support until this issue is resolved?
For this war to end, we basically see what Russians are actually now deceiving the world that they are interested in ending the war. But they, last month we accepted the ceasefire, the 30-day ceasefire, which Americans have offered and Russians did not. So in this period of time, what we have is that Russians now offered the ceasefire on May 9th or May 8th, and we don't understand why we have to wait. They can actually stop the war now, immediately and unconditionally. So in a way, it's up to America and Europe and Ukraine, as well with the help of Australia and New Zealand, that we can continue putting pressure on Russia. We can continue forcing them to stop. And the way to do it is certainly more military assistance for Ukraine. It's taken over the Russian sovereign assets, $300 billion of those, which must be used for Ukraine's defense, for Ukraine's rebuild, and also more sanctions on Russia. Sanctions on their defense industry, sanctions on their banking sector, on their nuclear sector. We have to sanction Russia until they can stop fighting. Because at the end of the day, Patricia, Russia keeps on selling their oil, and everybody's buying Russian oil. Turkey is buying, India is buying, Malaysia and Indonesia are buying Russian oil. They process that oil in their oil refineries, and then they sell this oil to you, to Europe, to other countries. And basically, as long as Russia can keep on selling oil, they'll keep on making weapons to kill Ukrainians. And the only way to stop Russia, to stop the war, they must not be able to sell oil, or the price of oil should be below $50. And this is where they will stop.
Ambassador, we obviously are just about to have our own domestic election. Our current Prime Minister, we're obviously in caretaker mode. Anthony Albanese has participated in the Coalition of the Willing phone call and that commitment. Would you urge the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, to take part in that if he is to become the next Prime Minister?
We have bipartisan support in Australia. Both Coalition and Labor support Ukraine very strongly, and I'm very thankful. By the way, I want to give you one example of how that support has manifested. I'm now in Queensland, as you know, and earlier this week, I went to the facility of Norja Power, a company which is making switchgear equipment. And Australian government donated last year $30 million to Europe Energy Support Fund. And Ukrainian government decided to use some of that money, $10 million, to procure equipment from Australia, demonstrating that it's a win-win. And I was actually witnessing the loading of this first batch of equipment, which is going to be destined for Ukraine to help us with our electricity systems, which Russians have destroyed. And as you know, coalition government shipped coal to Ukraine when I arrived here in Australia as an ambassador 3 years ago. So this is just one of the examples how energy support for Ukraine has been consistent on both sides of politics. With coalition, it was coal, and with Labor, it was actually electricity equipment that we were able to procure from the money Australian government provided. And by the way, that was both from Queensland, and I'm very pleased to be now reporting and sharing this from Queensland.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador.
Thanks for having me, Patricia.
After the wave of independents winning in 2022, election watchers are keeping a very keen eye on the performance of independents, not only that won their electorates last time to see if they'll get re-elected, but in new areas to see if new independents can get elected in our election on Saturday. Now, this election, there are now several incumbent independents trying to fend off Liberal Party challengers in some of those suburbs that, you know, have been leafy and well-heeled, Sydney and Melbourne, but there are new contests. Alex Dyson is a former Triple J presenter and is now contesting for the third time the seat of Wannon, attempting to unseat the Shadow Immigration Minister Dan Tehan. He joins me now. Alex, welcome.
Hello, Patricia. Good to be with you. I do feel like an old independent now, having run 3 times in a row, but it's so nice to be with you this afternoon.
An old independent. Well, ageing happens to all of us. Before we start, we should mention we have asked for an interview with your opponent and Shadow Minister Dan Tehan on the program. He's not available, but we think it's important to hear from independent aspirants or independents too. So let's talk. This is your 3rd time running. You started with 10%, then came second. This is the first time, perhaps, you've been this much of a chance, perhaps. But I've been reading that perhaps you're losing maybe that edge. Give me a sense of what's happening on the ground. It's historically a very conservative electorate.
Yeah, speaking of young politicians, it was Malcolm Fraser who won the seat of Wannon in 1955. He was in his mid-20s when that happened, and as a 36-year-old now, you're right, I'm on my 3rd tilt. Got a bit annoyed with politicians in 2019 and did run and get that 10%, and I think that gave me a taste for just what can happen when people come together for the common good in a community. So I managed to go around next time, and I remember at a candidate forum in 2022, I said up on stage that I was in it and I was going to win, and I think there was a bit of a chuckle through the crowd. So it was really encouraging after a 5-month campaign to come pretty close to actually getting this seat in different hands for the first time in 67 years, and that's the people have inspired me to run again and try and advocate for that change. And it would be the first time in 70 years that we've had a different member other than the Liberal Party in this area, and we've already seen the benefits of getting a bit closer this time around. We've a lot more interest in doing things that the people of the area really need. We're talking about roads, we're talking about childcare, and it's great that these issues are on the table, as well as the other projects that Southwest Victoria has really missed out on, not only because one party's been too far in front, but because another party, the Labor Party, have been too far behind and have really abandoned this seat.
So give me a sense of, like, last time a lot of the independents, you weren't successful, but the others as well, all campaigned a lot on climate. Also, women's issues were really big. Obviously, you're not a woman, but that doesn't mean those issues were not still really a big theme. They're not really the key issues at the moment, are they?
Well, for me, and that's why I ran in 2019, was I wanted to stand up for my community and my issues, and it was myself and my sister and a couple of friends did it. I had a $5,000 budget and was pushing for a few of the issues in the area, and that was better roads and rail. I meant to mention mental health, and the key thing about independence, and that's being able to vote based on merit, not vote on the party line. And so this time around, I did a 6-month listening tour around the electorate. I covered about 20,000 Ks. Down here in Southwest Victoria, the electorate of Wannon is bigger than the country of Belgium. So it's been a lot of driving, and I've been hearing from people, and roads has once again been at the top of a lot of people's lists. But crucially this time around, childcare has really emerged as something that politicians really need to be focusing on, particularly for regional communities. We're described, Patricia, as a childcare desert down here, and wait lists, talking to parents, they've been on 2 years, over 600 days for some people to get a spot in childcare. People are travelling from little towns like Cobden to Warrnambool to get their kids into childcare, an hour and a half extra travel, or they just don't turn up to work. I was getting my hair cut the other day, and the owner of the hairdresser's like, yeah, we struggle for staffing because a lot of our people, our hairdressers, have to stay home with the kids or grandparents, you know, the elderly Australians. Okay. The older Australians need to be looking after the kids, and so that's a big issue that's come about this time around, and it's born out of listening to the community.
One of the big issues that keeps getting raised, and it's certainly the entire portfolio of the man you're running against, is immigration. And the Coalition, of course, has promised to cut immigration. Do you believe, do you agree with the cut that the Coalition wants for immigration?
Well, it's really interesting on that because I think it should be in the mix when it comes to housing policy, but it's obviously not talking, DLT's not talking to a lot of businesses when it comes to getting skilled labour in the area, because that is something, whether it's farmers, whether it's some of the manufacturing people we have out here, whether in Ararat or Warrnambool, these kind of people really need jobs. Earth moving, I was having a meeting in Mortlake the other day and some skilled people were really required, and there's that really tricky situation of getting people in. And so when it comes to talking to my community and seeing what they need, you've got to be backing them in and making sure that small businesses and businesses across Wannon are in that area, whilst absolutely being sensible in that particular area to make sure that people have enough places to live down here, because it's a very tight rental market here in Warrnambool as well, but also across Wannon, and particularly on the surf coast. Wannon extends from Anglesey, Aireys Inlet, Lawn, all the way down to the South Australian border, and we do know that housing, particularly for young people, is an issue there.
As a very
it's
proud
gorgeous.
Victorian,
I would put it up
is
against any electorate in Australia. You've got the Grampians there, you've got the 12 Apostles, you've got the wonderful Warrnambool here all the way through
Let's end this tourism ad and let me ask two more questions. You sneak, you're very good at being a politician, at avoiding two more things, OK? Let's do this.
That's good. I try to tell people, make sure I don't start talking like a politician if I get in, because that is one of the things I don't want to be doing.
If you become an MP and you represent this seat, there's a chance that you could have a lot of power in a government and perhaps support a minority government. Who would you be dealing with first, the Coalition or Labor?
I would be booking my meetings with both straight up, because I'm really excited, finally Wannon having a seat at the table for politicians to take this area seriously. So the ball would be in the leaders' court as to who is really going to take on the concerns of the area and the issues that we've just mentioned, because we've barely got a look in over the time. I know it's Anthony Green's last election, but he hasn't uttered the words Wannon many times over the last 7 years, given how safe it's been. I'm really excited that we are in the mix now, and I would love to sit down with both leaders, talk about policies that are important to our community, and make sure that I'm voting on based on three things.
And you would consider supporting a Dutton government?
Absolutely, if it's in the best interests of the community, you would be able to go and talk. But having watched Swingers on the ABC, I think seeing the independents who have gone in the past, like Andrew Wilkie, Rob Oakeshott, I think they were very cautious about people making deals. And so I wouldn't necessarily be making any deals when it comes to that, but I would be advocating very strongly for my community. And hopefully we're in a position where Canberra will finally listen.
Alex, we'll see what happens Saturday night. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so much.
Today has seen the release of two new major polls showing Labor extending its lead over the Coalition. But could we be in for a potentially, well, long night? To get some candid chat from a couple of pollsters, I spoke to a panel of them a little earlier, election analyst and former Labor Senator John Black and John Scales from JWS Research. They joined me a short time ago. Two Johns, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon.
Let's talk polling. Should we trust the polling consensus which has publicly developed now that basically suggests Labor has it in the bag? John Black, first to you.
Look, I think it's a safe assumption, PK, to assume that Labor will have a narrow majority as it does now, 78, 79. I think a number of the more recent polls, particularly the MRP polls, are getting a bit excitable and over-egging the omelette a bit. But I think the government's going to be returned, and I think that's the consensus view and consistent with the campaigns.
Yeah, well, the campaign, I think there is a consensus that the Labor Party has out-campaigned the Coalition, but that doesn't always necessarily reflect how voters feel sometimes. So, John Scales, how do you see it? Because there is a broad consensus around this polling. You've been raising some other issues. How do you see it?
Yeah, I'm going to swim against the tide on this one, Patricia. I think there's something happening at a seat level that's not happening in the captured public polls. The seat level polling is showing up different results and there's some effects at play that the national polling is not picking up, and largely it's due to the way the polls are conducted, with the national polls not assisting the ballot with named candidates at the seat level, which the seat level does on big samples, and that's showing a different picture, which is still likely to show a Labor minority government, but certainly not majority.
Right, so just to clarify, you still think Labor is more likely to win, John Scales, but you think a majority is going to be difficult still?
Yeah, I think a Labor majority is probably highly unlikely. I think it's the most probable result is a Labor minority government, with them losing, you know, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 seats, something like that, putting them back into the low 70s.
John Black, I'll throw that back to you. That is a contrarian view, but if you speak to anyone in the Liberal Party, they also say that their own private polling is showing a different story. What's your assessment of that?
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they?
Yes, basically. They would. There's a lot of spin, of course.
But look, if you have a look at some of the comments from the off-the-record Liberal leaks from their campaign offices, they're couched in pretty cautious terms. They're optimistic, or they can see a path, or there is hope for. There's no definite evidence there, more an expression of ambition, really. So, no, I think I've tracked through the polls right through from February when they were looking pretty good for Dutton and the LNP, and that stayed the case in March, and then it just fell in a hole in April, late March, early April, and from then on it's gone nowhere but down. And you can track, Patricia, you can track this through some of the headlines that have come out, like the reduction in interest rates, the fiasco about work from home, and then Donald Trump. So you can see the impact of some of those factors on the drop in the coalition vote.
And John Scales, you too recognise there's been a drop in the coalition vote, right? What do you think means that it's still uncertain, though?
Well, I concede that it looks like it's been a better campaign for Labor over the Liberals. At the broad level, there's been a lot of things happening, starting with the cyclone. We've had the global tariff issue, we've had the death of the Pope, we've had holidays with Easter and Anzac. So all of those things and a few others play in favour of the incumbent, and probably largely a better campaign for Labor overall. But based on actual seat polling that we've done, we see there's an effect happening in some of the outer suburban, more working class types of seats, out of metro, peri-urban seats, where the minor party vote on the right of centre, Conservative parties, One Nation, Trumpet, Libertarian, are now on a combined basis polling more than the Greens, and the preference ratios are flowing as high from those parties back to the Liberal as the Green preferences are back to Labor. So it means that seats where traditionally the Liberals need to start 3 or 4 points ahead of Labor to ward off the Green preferencing from Labor, we're seeing that they're now able to be competitive on a starting primary basis, on an equal starting primary basis.
John Black, what do you think of the sort of One Nation right-wing vote going back at a higher level in preferences to the Liberal Party to assist them in maybe snagging some of these seats?
Yeah, look, you can see what John was talking about in the individual seats when you get right down to it. Traditionally, we're used to seeing the Greens being very strong and a growing force, if you like, particularly in the areas where they traditionally overperformed, closer towards the city and the CBDs. But we're not seeing that this time around. The Green vote is staying pretty much as it was last time in absolute terms, but it's taken a nosedive in some of those wealthier inner city areas, and it's picked up a little bit in the outer suburbs. But when you have a look at those seats in the outer suburbs, both of the major parties are taking hits below the water, and all of the non-major candidates who are running are from Family First or One Nation or the Trumpet of Patriots, and there's a couple of other ones as well. So yeah, look, the Greens aren't going to be able to bail Labor out in some of those seats, and the coalition vote after preferences is going to be, I think, a lot better than people imagine. So I still see Labor ahead with a majority, but I think there's going to be a lot of very nervous candidates, and the count is going to go on for a week or more before we know who's going to go out first and then who's going to get elected as a consequence.
Wow, that's really interesting analysis. John Scales, give me a sense of just how bad things might still be, particularly in the sort of outer mortgage belt Victoria, that's very angry at the Allen government, an old Labor government at the state level, because my kind of mail from my Labor contacts is that Victoria is still the problem, and that's what they're really worried about. That's what might drive them into minority potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the swing against Labor since the last election's been most negative in Victoria. It is the combined Albanese-Allen factor that the Liberal advertising here is playing with. So, and there's quite a lot of his seats exposed to this effect. In all those outer suburban working class seats, it is cost of living, it is the affordability and access to housing, and those issues are the priority for those people there. They're impacted the most. And in those seats, remember now, One Nation have a deal with the Liberals for preferences. So in those seats, the One Nation voters who take a how to vote card will probably be preferencing Liberal. Most of these minor party voters don't take how to votes, though. Remember, so it's a lot down to the campaign in terms of giving them a reason to not preference Labor. And Penny Wong's statements do that a little bit this week with her comments on The Voice. In seats where Liberal are trying to take Labor incumbent seats, and where Trumpet's saying they'll have the Labor incumbent last, so that favours the Liberals as well. You've got a plethora of other parties, as John mentioned. You've got Family First, you've got Libertarian, there's a few others, Citizens Alliance, and there's not as much choice on the left. There's mainly the Greens is the main choice. So, and you'll find some of the statements and campaigning of the Liberals will be playing to that alignment between some of the policies and announcements and values of those right-side conservative parties that does help them.
OK, so final question to both of you, starting with you, John Black. We're on election night, people are on the couch, they're watching very closely. What are the seats, the top 3 seats you will be looking at very closely for an indication of what the night means?
Well, in my case, I'll be looking at my local seat, which is Griffith, which is represented by Max Chandler-Mather, just to see what happens there. But I think he's going to get back. But I think the seat of Ryan and the seat of Brisbane are really illustrative of the sort of conflict that we've got and the strength of the minor parties, the right-wing minor parties, and the role that they're going to play. So I'll be watching that pretty closely, and I think it'll be representative of a lot of the other parts of Australia.
John Scales?
I'd be looking at McEwen here in Victoria, which is one of those classic outer metropolitan peri-urban seats. I'll be particularly interested just because it's got so much attention what happens in Kooyong. It's been a real line ball seat. And then I'd be looking at this effect I'm talking about with the minor party preferencing, how much it really has an effect. A seat like Werriwa or Whitlam in New South Wales, and a seat like Pearce in WA, which is like a 9% seat. So I don't expect that to turn, but it could get down to, it could really narrow the margin. We could, Labor could well hold on to a lot of these seats, and I expect them to do so, but it might mean for a very interesting pendulum with a lot of sub 5% Labor seats after the election that weren't so before.
It'll be very interesting. Thank you for letting me pick your brains. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
And that's afternoon briefing for today. Tomorrow, of course, is our final show before Australia votes, and next week we'll be telling you, of course, what the outcome will be. So join me tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Stay with us here on ABC News. Lorna Dunkley is up next with today's top stories. See you soon.